She wasn't asleep. Veronica Lawson lay perfectly still on the leather couch in her corner office. Her breathing was slow and measured as the man she'd entrusted with her company's finances, the man her daughter always asked about after daycare, walked right past her in the dim light. He wasn't heading toward her. He was heading for her desk. The silver USB drive was exactly where she'd left it. Bait. Evidence. A trap. His footsteps ceased. A drawer opened. The one she'd intentionally left unlocked. Papers rustled. Then came the sound that made her heart seize. The soft click of a camera phone. He was either the inside man destroying everything she had built, or something else entirely. His next move would decide whether she buried him, or whether they'd both go down in flames. 14 months earlier, Veronica Lawson had inherited an empire she never wanted. Her father's funeral had drawn a crowd of 300 people, defense contractors, military brass, board members in power suits. They shook her hand and told her how proud he would have been. She'd stood beside his casket, wearing a black dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, holding her 6-year-old daughter's hand, and felt nothing but a cold, creeping dread. Paige was too young to understand that Grandpa wasn't coming back. In that innocent way children have, she'd asked if he was sleeping. Veronica had said yes because the truth that her father had built his fortune on weapons that ended up in the wrong hands in wars that never should have been fought was too heavy for a child to carry. It was barely light enough for Veronica herself. The leather-bound ledger showed up at her office 3 days after the funeral. No note, no explanation. Just her father's handwriting, page after page of numbers and names and coded transactions that made her stomach churn. She'd spent weeks decoding it, cross-referencing shipping manifests and bank transfers. With each new discovery, the weight grew heavier. Lawson Defense Solutions wasn't just a company. It was a machine built to move weapons across borders, into countries under sanctions, into the hands of people who used them to crush dissent and wage proxy wars. Her father's last words, preserved on a voicemail she'd listened to 100 times, echoed in her mind. "Don't trust the board, Ronnie. Trust no one." She'd thought he was being paranoid. Now she understood. He'd known what he'd built. He'd known what would happen when she found out, and he'd left her to clean up the mess or drown in it. The FBI came 6 months after the funeral. Agent Ruiz was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a folder thick enough to stop a bullet. She'd sat across from Veronica in this same office, slid the folder across the desk and said, "We know about Karak. We know about the shell companies. We know about the Cyprus accounts, and we know your father didn't do this alone." Veronica had opened the folder. Shipping manifests, bank statements, photos of crates being loaded onto unmarked planes, her father's signature on documents that authorized transactions she'd never seen in the official books. She felt her throat close, her hands go numb. "I didn't know," she'd whispered. "We believe you," Ruiz had said. "But belief doesn't stop an indictment. You cooperate, we clear you. You stonewall, you go down with the ship. Your choice." So Veronica had cooperated. She'd handed over files, answered questions, worn a wire to board meetings where men her father had trusted talked about profit margins and plausible deniability. She'd smiled and nodded and played the grieving daughter while her world crumbled around her. All the while, classified information kept leaking to Granite Dynamics, their biggest competitor. Bid amounts, contract details, strategic plans. Someone inside Lawson Defense Solutions was bleeding them dry, and the FBI wanted to know who. That's when Caleb Donovan walked into her life. He'd been hired 8 months ago as Chief Financial Officer, brought in by the board to streamline operations and maximize profitability. He was older than most of the junior executives, late 30s, with the kind of quiet competence that made people trust him immediately. He didn't talk much about his past, just mentioned in passing that he was a widower, that his wife had died in childbirth 6 years ago, that he was raising his daughter alone. Veronica had respected his privacy. She understood grief, understood the way it carved out spaces inside you that never quite filled back in. Hazel Donovan was 6 years old, small for her age, with her father's dark eyes and a chronic asthma condition that kept an inhaler permanently clipped to her backpack. She and Paige had become inseparable within days of meeting at the company daycare center. Veronica would watch them through the glass wall of the daycare, heads bent together over crayons and construction paper, and feel something loosen in her chest. Paige had been so withdrawn after her grandfather's death, so quiet and careful, as if she were afraid to take up too much space. But with Hazel she laughed, she played, she was a child again. And Caleb was patient with both girls in a way that made Veronica's throat tight. He never rushed them, never raised his voice, never made them feel like they were an inconvenience. When Hazel had an asthma attack during a field trip, he'd dropped everything and driven across town to bring her inhaler, sitting with her in the nurse's office until her breathing steadied, murmuring reassurances in a voice so gentle it made Veronica want to cry. She'd started to trust him. Not with everything. Not with the FBI investigation, or the ledger, or the sick certainty that someone was sabotaging her from the inside, but with small things, financial decisions, strategic planning, the day-to-day operations of a company she was desperately trying to dismantle from within. She'd even let herself imagine, in weak moments late at night when Paige was asleep and the city lights blurred through her office windows, that maybe there was a future where she wasn't so alone, where someone understood the weight she carried, where Paige had more than just a mother drowning in her dead father's sins. Then the anonymous note arrived. It had been slipped under her office door sometime between midnight and 6 a.m. when the building was empty except for security. Plain white paper, printed in a standard font. Your CFO meets someone at Union Station every Thursday at 7 p.m. Check his laptop. Veronica had stared at that note for 20 minutes, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Every Thursday. The same night Caleb always worked late, always had an excuse for why he couldn't make it to the company dinners or the networking events. She'd thought he was just being a dedicated single father, squeezing in extra hours so he could spend weekends with Hazel. But now, looking at those words, she felt the trust she'd been building crack down the middle. She'd checked the security logs. Caleb had access to her restricted financial files. He'd opened them 14 times in the past 2 months, always after hours, always when he thought no one was watching. And those files contained everything the FBI had given her. Everything a competitor would pay millions to know. Agent Ruiz had been blunt when Veronica called her, "If he's the leak, we need proof, hard evidence. Something that'll stand up in court." "How?" Veronica had asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "You're a smart woman, Ms. Lawson. I'm sure you'll think of something." So she'd thought of something. She'd planted false documents in her desk drawer, offshore accounts that didn't exist, fake bids for contracts that weren't real. She'd loaded surveillance software onto a silver USB drive and left it in plain sight, disguised as a regular flash drive. And tonight, she'd told Caleb she had a late meeting, that she'd be out of the office until midnight. Then she'd come back early, locked her office door from the inside, and stretched out on the leather couch with her eyes closed and her heart hammering against her ribs, waiting. The minutes crawled by like hours. She focused on her breathing, keeping it slow and even, fighting the urge to open her eyes every time she heard a sound in the hallway. At 11:47, she'd heard the soft beep of a key card, the whisper of her office door opening, footsteps on carpet, the door closing again. Caleb had walked past her without stopping, without checking to see if she was really asleep, and gone straight to her desk. Now, lying in the darkness with her eyes closed and her pulse roaring in her ears, Veronica listened to the sounds of betrayal. The drawer sliding open, papers being moved, the click of his phone camera, once, twice, 3 times. Each sound was a nail in the coffin of the fragile hope she'd been carrying. Each sound said, "You were right not to trust him. You were right to be afraid." But then something changed. The rustling stopped. She heard him set something down. Not paper. Something heavier. Metal against wood. Then a soft electronic hum, barely audible, sweeping across the room in a slow arc. A bug detector. He was sweeping her office for listening devices. Veronica's breath caught. The USB drive, the one she'd planted with the surveillance software. If he found it, if he disabled it, she'd have nothing. But the humming continued, moving away from her desk toward the bookshelves, the corners of the room. He wasn't looking for the USB. He was looking for something else. The humming stopped near her couch. Veronica's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she was sure he could hear it. Then she heard him crouch down, heard the soft click of something being removed from under the side table, the listening device she'd planted there 2 weeks ago. He'd found it. "Forgive me, Veronica," he whispered so quietly she almost didn't hear it. "But I have to know the truth." Then he was moving again, back to her desk, and she heard something that made her forget to breathe, the soft metallic sound of a dog tag sliding out from under his shirt, the faint scrape of it against his phone as he took another photo. In the glow of his screen, just for a second, she saw the engraving. Donovan, Caleb, USMC, FBI. Her mind went blank. Then it exploded into 1,000 jagged pieces. FBI. He wasn't stealing information, he was investigating her. He thought she was the criminal. He thought she was running her father's trafficking network, not trying to dismantle it. He'd been watching her, documenting her, building a case while she'd been doing the exact same thing to him. The absurdity of it hit her like a physical blow. They'd been circling each other like wolves, each convinced the other was the enemy, while the real threat moved freely through the company, unseen and untouched. She sat up. Caleb spun around, his hand going immediately to his jacket, where she now realized he kept a concealed weapon. The city lights behind her turned her into a silhouette, and for a frozen moment they stared at each other across the darkness of her office. "Don't move," she said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. She reached over and flipped on the desk lamp. Light flooded the room. Caleb's face was pale, his jaw tight. His eyes were locked on hers with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. His hand was still inside his jacket, but he hadn't drawn the weapon yet. "Show me your ID," Veronica said slowly. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, carefully, he pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open. FBI credentials. A photo of him in a suit, looking younger and harder than the man who read bedtime stories to Hazel every night. Special Agent Caleb Donovan, Organized Crime Division. Veronica pulled Agent Ruiz's card from her pocket and held it up. "She recruited me 6 months ago. I've been cooperating since day one. I'm not running my father's network. I'm trying to burn it down." The color drained from Caleb's face. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "You're the asset." "Ruiz wouldn't tell me who." He broke off, dragging a hand through his hair. "Operational security. I thought you were the target." "And I thought you were the leak," Veronica said. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the desk to steady them. "Someone's been feeding information to Granite Dynamics. Someone with access to restricted files. You fit the profile." "So do half the people in this building," Caleb said. Then his phone buzzed. They both looked down at it, and Veronica saw the alert notification at the same time he did. Her company server. Someone was accessing classified files. Right now. Caleb's eyes snapped to hers. "Who else has access to your office after hours?" Veronica pulled up the security system on her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys. The camera feed loaded, showing the server room 3 floors down, a figure in a black jacket, face turned away from the camera, plugging a hard drive into the main terminal. Small frame, efficient movements, long dark hair pulled into a ponytail. "Bryn," Veronica whispered. Bryn Cho, her CFO assistant, the quiet, efficient woman who came in early and stayed late, who never complained, never caused problems, never drew attention to herself. "She's been here the whole time." Caleb was already moving, pulling his phone out to call for backup. But Veronica grabbed his arm. "Wait. If we move now, we get Bryn. But she's not the top. She can't be. She doesn't have the authority to set up shell companies, to authorize international shipments. Someone else is pulling the strings." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then we follow her, see where she leads." They watched the security feed as Bryn finished downloading files, unplugged the hard drive, and slipped it into her jacket pocket. She left the server room, moving quickly through the empty hallways, and exited through the rear entrance, where security cameras had conveniently malfunctioned 2 weeks ago. A malfunction Veronica had assumed was routine maintenance. "She's been planning this for months," Veronica said, feeling sick. "Maybe longer." Caleb pulled up a tracking program on his laptop. "I put a GPS tracker on her car last week. She's moving east toward Alexandria." He looked at Veronica. "Call Ruiz. Tell her we need a surveillance team." But Veronica was staring at her phone, at a text message that had just come through from the company daycare's after-hours service. "Hi, Miss Lawson. Just confirming that Miss Cho picked up Paige and Hazel at 11:30 as authorized. Have a good night." The world tilted. Veronica's vision tunneled. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that felt like drowning. "She has them," she whispered. "She has our daughters." Caleb's face went white, then red, then something beyond color, something cold and terrible. "Hazel left her inhaler on my desk," he said, his voice barely human. "She needs it every 4 hours." They moved as one, Veronica grabbing her keys, Caleb calling Agent Ruiz as they ran for the elevator. The GPS tracker showed Bryn's car stopped at an address in Alexandria, an abandoned shipping warehouse near the waterfront. The kind of place where screams wouldn't carry, where concrete walls swallowed sound. Agent Ruiz's voice crackled through the phone speaker as Veronica drove, breaking every traffic law between downtown and Alexandria. "Do not engage. Wait for backup. We're 12 minutes out." "Hazel needs her inhaler," Caleb said, and there was nothing in his voice now but a father's desperation. 12 minutes might as well be 12 hours. They pulled up to the warehouse at 11:58. The building loomed against the night sky, all rusted metal and broken windows. Bryn's car sat in the loading bay, empty. Veronica killed the engine, and in the sudden silence they could hear it. A child's wheezing cough, high and panicked, echoing from inside the warehouse. Caleb was out of the car before Veronica could stop him. She grabbed Hazel's inhaler from his glove compartment and followed, her heels silent on the cracked asphalt. The warehouse door hung open, revealing a cavernous space lit by a single work light. And there, in the center of that vast emptiness, were Paige and Hazel. They sat on the concrete floor, hands zip-tied behind their backs. Paige's arm was around Hazel's shoulders as the smaller girl struggled to breathe. Both of them looked up as Veronica and Caleb appeared in the doorway, and the relief in their eyes was so profound it nearly brought Veronica to her knees. "Mommy," Paige whispered. "Right on time," said a voice from the shadows. Bryn stepped into the light, and she wasn't alone. Beside her stood Garrett Finch, 62 years old, member of the board of directors, her father's best friend, the man who'd carried Veronica on his shoulders when she was Paige's age, the man who'd given the eulogy at her father's funeral. Veronica felt something break inside her chest. "Uncle Garrett?" "Not your uncle," Garrett said. His voice was nothing like the warm, paternal tone she remembered. "Your father's partner, his architect, and you were supposed to inherit the empire and keep your mouth shut. Veronica, you were supposed to be a good girl and let the adults handle the complicated things, but you had to go digging, had to play detective, had to bring in the FBI." "You're the leak," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the gun Garrett was now pointing at the children. "You've been selling information to Granite Dynamics while setting up Veronica to take the fall for your father's operation." "Granite Dynamics is mine," Garrett said. "Has been for 5 years." "Your father never knew Veronica. Too trusting, too sentimental. He thought I was his friend." He smiled, and it was the coldest thing Veronica had ever seen. "I've been systematically destroying Lawson Defense from the inside while building my own company with your trade secrets. And when the FBI finally moves in, all the evidence points to you, the grieving daughter who couldn't handle her father's legacy, who turned his legal business into a criminal enterprise, who will spend the next 20 years in federal prison while I consolidate power." Hazel's breathing was getting worse. Each inhale was a desperate whistle. Caleb took a step forward. "Let me give her the inhaler, then we'll talk." "Stay where you are," Garrett said, adjusting his aim, "or I'll shoot you in front of your daughter. Let her watch you bleed out on this concrete. Is that what you want, Agent Donovan, for that to be the last thing she sees?" Veronica's mind raced. The FBI was still 10 minutes out. Garrett had a gun. The girls were tied up, defenseless, and Hazel was getting worse by the second. She needed a distraction. She needed leverage. She needed the silver USB drive still in her pocket, still recording. She pulled it out slowly, held it up where Garrett could see it. You want to know why I came back to the office tonight? Why I was sleeping on my couch?" She pressed a button on the side, and a tiny red light began to blink. "I've been recording everything, every word you just said, every confession. It's all here, Garrett, and it's already uploading to a secure server. Even if you kill us all, the FBI will have everything." It was a lie. The USB drive was just a listening device, and its battery had died hours ago. But Garrett didn't know that. She saw the calculation in his eyes, the sudden uncertainty. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Am I?" Veronica took a step forward. "You want to bet your empire on it?" "Because I'm not. I'm betting on the fact that you're a coward, Garrett. You let my father take all the risks while you hid behind shell companies and offshore accounts. You let Bryn do your dirty work while you played the grieving friend. And now you're holding children hostage because you're too weak to face the consequences of what you've built." Garrett's hand tightened on the gun. For a terrible moment, Veronica thought he was going to shoot her. Then Caleb moved. He was fast, faster than a man his size should be. He hit Garrett low and hard, tackling him to the concrete as the gun went off, the shot echoing like thunder through the warehouse. Veronica was already running, sliding to her knees beside Hazel, fumbling with the inhaler. The little girl's lips were turning blue, her eyes were wide with terror. "Breathe, baby," Veronica whispered, holding the inhaler to Hazel's mouth, pressing the trigger nice and slow. "That's it. You're okay." "You're safe." Behind her she heard Caleb and Garrett struggling, heard Bryn's footsteps running for the exit. Then came the sound of sirens growing louder, and the warehouse flooded with light as FBI vehicles surrounded the building. Agent Ruiz burst through the door with a team of agents, weapons drawn, and the chaos of the arrest swept through the space like a wave. Veronica cut the zip ties from the girl's wrists and pulled Paige into her arms, holding her so tight she felt her daughter's ribs against her own. Caleb gathered Hazel up, the inhaler still pressed to her mouth, and the four of them collapsed together on that cold concrete floor while federal agents swarmed around them. Paige was crying. Hazel was still wheezing, but breathing better. Caleb's hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold his daughter. And Veronica, who hadn't cried since her father's funeral, felt tears streaming down her face and couldn't stop them. "We're okay," Paige whispered against her mother's shoulder. "Mommy, we're all okay." And Veronica realized that the all included Caleb, that somewhere in the past 8 months her daughter had decided he was part of their family, that she'd been drawing him into their life in ways Veronica had been too afraid to see. The hospital waiting room smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Hazel was stable. The doctor said the asthma attack had been severe, but she'd respond well to treatment. She'd need to stay overnight for observation, but she'd be fine. She'd be fine. Caleb had broken down when they told him. Great, shaking sobs that he tried to muffle against his hands while Veronica sat beside him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Nothing that would make this better. Nothing that would erase the image of his daughter struggling to breathe while a man pointed a gun at her. Paige had fallen asleep against Veronica's side, still wearing Caleb's dog tag. He'd given it to her in the ambulance, pressed it into her small hand, and told her she was the bravest person he'd ever met. Now it hung around her neck on its chain, catching the fluorescent light every time she breathed. Agent Ruiz appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted. "Garrett's in custody. Bryn, too. We found enough evidence in that warehouse to put them both away for 30 years minimum. Shell company documents, shipping manifests, bank transfers, everything we needed. She looked at Veronica. You did good, Ms. Lawson. Your father would be... She stopped, seemed to reconsider. Well, you did good. What happens to the company? Veronica asked, her voice barely a whisper. That's up to you, Ruiz replied, her expression unreadable. Technically, you're cleared of all wrongdoing. You cooperated fully with the investigation. You helped us bring down a major trafficking network. Ruiz continued. The company's assets will be frozen during the trial, but after that... She shrugged, leaving the unspoken possibilities hanging in the air. You could keep it running, clean house, rebrand, start fresh. Veronica's gaze drifted down to Paige, noticing the way her daughter's small hand clutched Caleb's dog tag, even in sleep. Images flashed through her mind. The leather-bound ledger, her father's chilling voice on that voicemail, the crushing weight she'd been carrying for 14 long months. In that moment, she knew exactly what she had to do. No, she stated quietly, her voice firm despite the tremor in her heart. I'm going to dissolve it, liquidate all the assets. Every single penny that didn't come from illegal activity will go into a fund for the victims of weapons trafficking, for the communities torn apart by the guns my father sold. That's the only way this ends. It has to be. Ruiz studied her intently for a long moment, her gaze piercing and assessing. Finally, she nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in her eyes. That takes guts, Ms. Lawson. Most people would take the money and run, disappear without a trace. I'm not most people, Veronica replied, her voice resolute. And I'm definitely not my father. 3 months later, Veronica found herself in a co-working space in Arlington, a far cry from her opulent old office. The rent was 1/10 of what she used to pay, and she was surrounded by the murmur of other people's conversations and the constant hiss of an espresso machine. Yet, despite the humble surroundings, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The Arsenal Accountability Project was small, consisting of just her, 2 dedicated lawyers, and a handful of passionate volunteers. But it was real. It was clean, and most importantly, it was hers. Paige was happier too. She had so much more time with her mother now, and they spent afternoons at the park, weekends making pancakes, and enjoyed movie nights that didn't end with Veronica collapsing asleep on the couch, too exhausted to even climb the stairs to bed. Paige had even started drawing again, filling pages with crayon families, playful dogs, and cozy houses with wisps of smoke curling from their chimneys. The doorbell rang one Saturday morning while Veronica was attempting to cook breakfast, a task she was failing at spectacularly. She opened the door to find Caleb standing there, Hazel by his side, holding a package wrapped in plain brown paper. "You forgot this," he said, extending the package towards her. "The FBI returned it last week. Thought you might want it." Veronica carefully unwrapped the package and found the leather-bound ledger, her father's distinctive handwriting on the cover. Inside were records of her father's dealings, her father's sins. She held it for a moment, feeling the immense weight of it in her hands, and then looked up at Caleb, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions. "Come with me," she said softly. They walked to the park 3 blocks away, Paige and Hazel racing ahead to the playground, their laughter echoing in the air. They found an empty barbecue pit near the picnic tables. Veronica tore pages from the ledger one by one, feeding them to the hungry flames, watching her father's empire turn to ash before her eyes. Caleb stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, saying nothing. He didn't offer empty platitudes, didn't tell her it was okay, didn't tell her to just let it go. He simply stayed, bore witness to her pain, and allowed her to do what she needed to do. When the last page had been consumed by the flames, Veronica turned to him, her face streaked with soot and tears. "I tested you," she said quietly, her voice raw with emotion. "I pretended to be asleep and set a trap for you because I was too afraid to trust anyone." "I'm sorry. I investigated you," Caleb replied, his voice equally soft. "I documented your every move because it was my job, and somewhere along the way I forgot that you were a person, not just a case file. I'm sorry too." They stood there in the morning sunlight, watching their daughters play, and Veronica felt something shift deep inside her, something that had been locked tight for so long she'd almost forgotten it was even there. "Hazel asks about you every night," Caleb said, breaking the silence. "She wants to know when she'll see Paige again." "Paige draws you into every picture," Veronica admitted, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "She's already decided your family." "And what have you decided?" Caleb asked, his eyes searching hers. Veronica looked at him, at this man who had been her enemy, her ally, and her mirror. This man who had seen her at her absolute worst and hadn't walked away. "I've decided that trust isn't something you simply have. It's something you build every day, one choice at a time." Caleb smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since the warehouse. "Then let's build it," he said, his voice filled with a newfound hope. They started small, with coffee dates with the girls, Saturday afternoons at the playground, dinners where Caleb cooked and Veronica did the dishes, and the girls built elaborate forts out of couch cushions. Slowly, carefully, they began to build something new from the rubble of what they'd almost destroyed. 1 year later, Agent Ruiz came to Veronica's backyard barbecue, bringing a bottle of wine and joking about the worst undercover partnership that had somehow, against all odds, actually worked. Garrett Finch was serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison. Brincho had taken a plea deal and was testifying against other members of the trafficking network. Lawson Defense Solutions had been dissolved, its assets distributed to victims' funds and humanitarian organizations. And Veronica? Veronica had learned to trust again. Not perfectly, not without fear, but she'd learned that sometimes the people you think will destroy you are the very ones who save you instead. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close your eyes and let someone else see you, truly see you, in all your broken, terrified, hopeful humanity. That night, after the guests had left and the girls were asleep upstairs in Hazel's room, Caleb and Veronica sat on the porch swing in the summer darkness. He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. They'd earned this. Every quiet moment, every small gesture of faith, every conscious choice to stay. "You know what's wild?" Veronica said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "A year ago I thought trust was a luxury I simply couldn't afford, and now I know it's the only thing worth investing in." Above them, stars emerged one by one from the darkness, twinkling like diamonds scattered across a velvet cloth. And somewhere inside their daughters' dreams, they dreamed of a future where love wasn't a weapon and family wasn't defined by blood, but by the daily choice to show up, to stay, to build something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. Veronica had tested Caleb that night in her office, had set a trap to catch a traitor, and instead she'd found something far more dangerous and far more precious. A man who'd been just as afraid as she was, just as lonely, just as desperate to protect the people he loved. And in that shared terror, in that mutual recognition of two people drowning in the same dark water, they'd found not an ending, but a beginning. She'd frozen when she saw what he did in her office that night. Not because he was stealing from her, but because he was exactly like her, fighting the same fight, bearing the same burdens, trying to be enough for a child who deserved more than a parent haunted by ghosts. And maybe that was the real truth, hidden in that moment of stillness, in that held breath, while she watched him through closed eyes. That the person you're most afraid of trusting might be the only one who truly understands why you're afraid. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to reach out your hand anyway into the darkness, hoping someone will take it. Caleb squeezed her hand gently, and Veronica squeezed back. And in that small gesture lived all the words they'd never needed to say. All the apologies, the promises, and the quiet vows that didn't need speaking because they were already being lived day by ordinary day in 1,000 small choices to stay, to trust, to build a life together from the wreckage of the lives they'd almost lost. The swing creaked softly beneath them, and somewhere in the house one of the girls laughed in her sleep. Veronica closed her eyes, not to test, not to trap, but simply to rest, knowing that when she opened them again, he would still be there.